for supporting the Colorado Sun. The Colorado Sun is a member of the Trust Project. See our commitment to trusted journalism at coloradosun.com/ethics. I am so happy that you are all here tonight for this incredible conversation that I have really been excited for weeks to have. And I'm actually really surprised that 270 of you showed up or at least signed up, because that's a pretty astounding number. But at the same time, I'm not surprised because wolves and wolf reintroduction is so interesting. And now that we're in year 2 of it, we have a lot to talk about. So that's why we invited our 2 guests who are arguably know more about what's going on with Colorado wolves than anyone. The first one is Eric Odell. He is CPW's Wolf Conservation Program Manager, and he's been critical to developing and implementing the plan to restore and manage gray wolves in Colorado from the beginning. And we also have Brenna Cassidy, who's the statewide wolf monitoring coordinator for CPW and has studied wild carnivores throughout the northern Rocky Mountains. So I just want to thank you two for coming. It's great that you chose to spend your evening with us.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Thanks for putting this together, and looking forward to spending the afternoon, evening with you.
Yeah. So let's just dive in. I'm going to do, I kind of have a plan here. I'm going to jump from my questions to reader questions because we wanted to let readers submit some of their own questions when they registered, because we know everybody is just really curious about what's going on with the wolves. So I'm kind of just going to toggle back and forth. But because this event is called Wolf Reintroduction 2.0, I thought it was only appropriate that we start with you, Eric, because you just recently were critical to getting the most recent group of wolves that we have here from British Columbia. And I know that you have some pretty incredible stories about that. And so I wanted to start with you just to find out, what was it like getting them, and how is it different from getting the wolves from Oregon?
Yeah, it's been very exciting, and I think by 2.0 you mean year 2 of what
Yes,
we've been
exactly.
doing here. Yeah, and so this is year 2 of the restoration project, and we hope to do it for at least another year or two to continue on to work to establish a population. And it wasn't just me. I mean, I think it's really important to give credit to the big team that we had. Brenna was critical in that. We had 11 people in British Columbia, and I think about that, if not the same number in Oregon as well, and cooperation from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife last year, it was actually in December of 2023, and then British Columbia was just a great partner for the last year in planning and in implementing this. So it was, a lot of work went into getting everything ready for us to go up and try to capture wolves and translocate wolves. And so it's a challenging thing to do. These are big, wide-ranging animals. We had a lot of, like I say, a lot of preparation that went into this, conversations about the logistics of it, how we were going to actually do the capture, how we're going to transport animals around, care for them, and do all of the different things that we do for all wildlife species that we capture and translocate. And so British Columbia was a great experience. We had just great support from them. We were prepared. They had warned us that we were going to be facing 30-degree below centigrade Celsius temperatures and terrible winds and conditions. We actually were right at zero, right at freezing, 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and had really opportunistic, really great conditions for capture work, and uh, just had a great time. And in a matter of 6 days, captured all 15 of the wolves that we transported down to Colorado and released in the middle of January, just a little bit over a couple months ago now.
Excellent. So can you dig a little bit deeper and just tell us what it takes to capture a wolf?
Yeah, it takes a lot of good luck and a lot of hard work. Both things I think are really key to it. So the hard work comes in that, we British Columbia monitors their wolves to some degree, but not to the same level that a lot of other states do. And so we worked with their biologists to put a lot of collars out, radio collars out early on in late December and early January, just so that we would be able to find wolves when we had the whole teams and everything there. And so that means capturing wolves early on, putting on these heavy duty collars that have GPS signals on them and radio signals, so we can use those to locate the animals. And then when we're up there and we're actually doing the capture work, we had a system of 2 different helicopters. One is a pretty small, agile helicopter that's got three people in it. It's got a pilot and then a gunner. He's called. He uses a net gun, and when they're on the wolf, they'll shoot the net gun down, and that kind of entraps the wolf. It's got weights around it, and so it slows it down. And then another person that comes out and then just physically immobilizes the animal using a pole and holds that animal down against the snow. We do all this work in the wintertime because that's when the temperatures are cold and we can use that snow for tracking, things like that. And then they do a quick assessment of the animal and make sure that it's healthy, make sure it doesn't have any broken legs, broken limbs. It's got good teeth, good eyes. It looks like it would be a suitable candidate. We also look for ages when we're capturing these wolves. So we don't want animals that are pups that were born in that particular year because they're just too naive. They're not ready to take on living by themselves. And so with those animals, if they were to catch something that did not meet the criteria that we wanted, then they would put a collar on that animal and re-release it, send it back out, and we would use that, take advantage of that animal later on as we're trying to locate other animals. And then if it's a good animal, then for our purposes, they would sedate it. They would give it some drugs that would immobilize it, and then we would bring a second helicopter in, and that's a larger helicopter. We would there would be a pilot, a biologist, and a veterinarian on that. We would load the wolf into that helicopter and then transport it back to the area where we had our operational base. And the reason we used helicopters in Oregon, we did not, or sorry, in British Columbia, we did not do that in Oregon, was just because it's a pretty roadless area, especially in the wintertime. There's summertime roads, but it's not accessible. And so it was really the only way to make it possible for us to get that much work done in that little bit of a time. So it was so then there's a whole process too. Once you get the animals back to the operational base, we weigh them and measure them, collect some blood samples, tissue samples, hair samples, put a collar on it, and then get it ready for transport. And typically we keep these animals no more than 2 nights in at the base. So we've built these. We had these big pens built that were about essentially a big dog run. It made a chain link fence about 8 feet by 8 feet, and with hay and the ice block in there. And so the animals would stay in those pens overnight, and then the night before transport they would be put in the crates, and typically that involved another immobilization, chemical immobilization,
Mhm.
to get them so that we could handle them, put them in the crates, and the crates also had hay and ice block in there. And so they would the crates were left in those pens overnight, and then early in the morning it was a drive down to the airport, a couple hours, and we met with a pilot that had donated his time in plane, a private plane that was able to, we were able to use that to transport the animals down to back to Colorado, and then began the process of transporting them to the release sites, and then ultimately the release of animals. So there's a lot to it. It's lots of moving pieces, lots of moving parts, lots of really important people to have in there. Everybody from veterinarians to biologists to helicopter pilots, and videographers, lots of all of the different kinds of things to document what we're doing, and make sure that we're getting animals that meet the criteria that we have, making sure that we're taking care of the animals, and also taking care of the people too, making sure that there's no injuries or anything along those lines too. And we were incredibly successful, and I think a lot of that is just due to the months of work that we put into the preparation of that.
Yeah, excellent. One more on this topic, and then I'll ask Brenna a question. Um, so you're in the plane with multiple crates flying to Colorado. Is that how that works? And if so, are the wolves are all sedated and they're all asleep, or were there any moments where they were like one would kind of wake up or whatever, and you had just like this one-on-one moment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We get that question a lot. That the animals were not sedated at all. They
Oh
were
wow.
sedated the night before to put in the crates and then the next morning they were the crates. The animals are totally awake in their crates, and then driven in a trailer to the airplane, and they're fully awake in in the crates while we're in the plane. And there's five of them, all strapped down and secured, but they're completely calm. I mean, there was no scratching at the doors, no biting at anything. And they do have an ice block in there for hydration and for some diversionary kind of stuff, and you would hear them batting around at that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there was no action, no activity at all. Silent animals on the plane rides, Yeah, just very, very, very calm, surprisingly calm. And we had been told by other people that had done a lot of wolf transport that that's what we should expect. I didn't really
Mhm.
believe them until we actually experienced it, but it's true. It was there were yeah, no issues at all. Which is a totally surprising kind of aspect of all of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I can imagine it being a little eerie too, maybe. Like all
It's a
these predators staring at you calmly, but staring at you.
it's quite a day for them. Like if you think about what they've done, what they've gone through in the last 24 hours, and so I think there's some, you know, just some uncertainty as to where they are, and new smells, new sounds, new things that they had not experienced at all. And so yeah, it was very much just a way to get them around. And you could, we got some pretty neat photographs of them in the pens, or in the crates rather. And you just put the phone right up to the little hole in the crate, and get some pretty neat photos, and some of those are available on our website that we've used.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Brenna, this question's for you. You have what I think is just an incredible job because of what you get to see. And I wanted to ask you, we're out here in the world, we're the people who receive the information from CPW, and we get the maps, the data color, maps that show up every month, and so we kind of get a view of where the wolves are and what they're doing. Well, not what they're doing, but where they're going. And um, but there's a little bit of a delay, right? So there's like, okay, cool, I can see this, but they're not there anymore. And I know from chatting with you just a little bit, you have a different relationship with the wolves based on your monitoring them through with the collar data. And I just wanted you to tell us a little bit about what that's like, what you see, what you're actually watching in real time as they move around, or a little bit delayed time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We from our GPS collars, we don't have, the exact real-time data of that wolf is right there right now, but we have close to it. We know where they were yesterday as opposed to, 3 weeks ago when some of those maps come out. It's pretty fascinating to see what they're doing. We get GPS points every 4 hours, and then about every day, those GPS points upload to our map. So they have like a satellite link that they load up to our map. So it's incredibly fascinating seeing right after translocation. These wolves have been through quite a process over the last probably 2 days, 2.5 days or so. So they, leave the crate and they're in such a new world. And wolves are incredibly resilient creatures. So it seems like they kind of go straight into that exploratory mode. They're curious about their environment. They're trying to figure out what it's like where they are. So what we have seen lately is really interesting because we have these wolves who have been in Colorado for, a little bit over a year from Oregon, and we have these wolves from British Columbia who have only been here for 2 months or so. And the wolves that were from Oregon, they've gotten a pretty good idea of the landscape that they live in at this point. They might have met each other. They might have met the two wolves that were already in Colorado. But British Columbia wolves that we just brought in, they're a little bit different because they are brand new. But what's really cool, I think, is that they're finding very similar travel pathways. So the wolves that have been here for a little over a year have kind of figured out good ways to travel throughout the landscape. And the wolves from British Columbia are also finding those areas. So whatever it is about the wolves seeing a landscape in a certain way, they're cluing into kind of similar things. And I would love to know if, a mountain lion is doing the same thing, a bear is doing the same thing, an elk or a moose or something. Just the way that they see the landscape in a similar way has been really fascinating. And then, kind of the second thing that I've found really interesting is the way that they might meet each other and either stick together or completely turn a 180 and want nothing to do with each other. Because, remember, some of the wolves that we brought in are have some sort of relationship with each other, whether they might be a pack mate, or they were neighbors with that pack, so they might have already heard that other wolf on the landscape, smelled the other wolf on the landscape, or lived with them their whole life.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to ask you about that a little bit later about, I was kind of wondering like, are they ganged up and they're each sticking with their gang and are territorial, or are they, intermingling? What's happening in that realm?
Yeah, it's kind of dependent on which wolf you might think about. A little bit of everything is going on.
Hmm.
So there are some wolves that are all by themselves, and they are doing big movements. They're exploring the landscape, kind of all over the place. And then there are some wolves that are a little bit more of a homebody. They kind of have stuck to one area, and we don't know exactly if that's a wolf maybe setting up a territory, or if it's a wolf that just isn't as interested in looking for something better. They like where they're at now. So we have those lone wolves kind of want like moving through the landscape, but we also have wolves that are together. Pack mates that we brought from British Columbia
Hmm.
are traveling together. Some of them might be mated pairs, some of them might be siblings. So it kind of depends on the relationship of that wolf to the others that they're near, of what they're going to do, and maybe how widely they travel. Because we have wolves that are traveling widely, and some that aren't, and are sticking in areas that they seem to like.
That brings up a few different questions. I'm sure people in the audience are wondering. So, last year at this time, we had some issues going on with wolves in Grand County. And I can imagine that makes people a little bit nervous to hear that these wolves are following the same patterns. Is that happening? Or, do you, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Yeah, we don't necessarily have wolves setting up exactly where wolves were last year, to kind of like broadly, I'm just kind of broadly saying when they go from, this 20 miles over here to this 20 miles over here, they might be kind of using the general same travel paths. And I usually think about wolves needing a couple different things. They are habitat generalists, which means they can be in a lot of different types of habitat. They can be in, densely forested areas, areas of sagebrush, kind of scrubland area. Um, but they do need a couple things. They need tolerance from humans to be on the landscape that they're sharing. They need food wherever they're going, and they need connectivity to those places. So in some places, it just so happens that there might be a funnel that kind of takes them from one big area of wilderness to another big area of wilderness, and they might move through that area pretty quickly. But they have to get from one area to the other. So that's kind of those areas that I'm talking about, that we see kind of a pattern, if you will.
Okay.
Tracy, I'll add just a little bit more to that too. I mean, we're in a very unique phase, kind of in terms of wolf restoration, wolf recolonization, in that there's there's a lot of wolves on the landscape now that aren't territorial. I mean, they haven't set up packs, they haven't reproduced, and once that happens, once there is pairing and reproduction, and then there's essentially a pack that becomes territorial and starts to defend a territory, movements will change a lot. Right now, what we have are a lot of just independent animals trying to figure out which way is up, and trying to find pairs and trying to find areas that are going to be unique for them. And Brenna did a great job kind of identifying what they need for a territory. It's not a whole lot, but it is somewhat particular. And so, as wolves, as we do get that pack establishment and that territory establishment, we'll get a bit more of predictable movement of animals or within a territory. But right now we get animals that, as you said earlier, as Brent said earlier, crisscross back and forth, come into contact, repel, and then come back into contact later on. And so it's a
Hmm.
really interesting time to be watching the data that we have, because it's nothing is unexpected, but nothing's predictable. I think is the way that we say it, is that we could see animals that make big 300, 400, 500 mile movements, and we have seen that. And we've also seen animals that are staying within a, probably a, I don't know what the numbers are, a couple of, maybe 10, 20 square miles, or something like that, or probably smaller, even smaller than that area too. And so, we're seeing some, these are all just animals that have their own personalities, and doing what they do. And so in a year, in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, we'll have a very different story to tell, because the animals will have found their way, and found what it is that they like on the landscape, and establish those territories. And then they do become much more territorial, and there won't be that kind of movement across territories as much as what we're seeing right now.
That's super interesting. Well, since you brought up mating, is it happening?
Tis the
Is it
season.
anyone doing it?
Yeah, we don't know necessarily. So the way the kind of calendar for a wolf works is breeding season takes place in mid-February or so. Some people say that they take Valentine's Day very seriously, trying to find love on the landscape. And then the gestation period is very similar to domestic dogs. It's about 63, 65 days or so. So that kind of puts us into mid-April, early May or so, depending on when those wolves breed. So we don't exactly know who's bred with who. Just because two wolves are traveling together doesn't necessarily mean that that female will successfully become pregnant and then carry those pups to term, and then have those pups survive their first couple weeks, which are pretty crucial. A small little pup is pretty vulnerable to a lot of different things. So we don't know yet. We'll know a little bit more in a month or so, and then even more, in the month after that, in May. Because we're not seeing these wolves every day. We're not trying to get visuals on them to know exactly who bred with who or anything like that. So we suspect that there have been male female pairs that have bred, because they were together in February and are still together. But we don't know exactly, and we'll have to. That's one of I think the coolest parts of my job is being able to kind of track that mystery down every year.
Oh yeah, that's a very cool job. I have a reader question in here that I think applies to this. Of course, I can't see very well. Oh, they're asking if CPW could give someone a 30-day-old GPS location of each wolf until a group of wolves start denning, then remove them from the list and provide their GPS location afterward, I think is the question. Does that make sense?
I'm a little confused.
Um, I think it was a Denning question, and you kind of
Okay.
already talked about that. But I do remember last year, you talked about CPW talked about the fact that this pair had stopped moving around, and that indicated that they were denning, right? So
Yes.
you maybe the question is, if you see that going on and it's in an area where there's ranches or something, would that be something that you would communicate to ranchers like you have been with just wolves on the landscape in general?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
for sure it is. I mean, yes, the maps that we produce, and we put on our website are very general. Totally recognize that is not the resolution of data that's very interesting or informative, especially to people that have concerns about wolves. And so I think it's real important to communicate that we do our field staff, and we've got district wildlife managers in every city, town, and village of Western Colorado, throughout the state, really, and they are in very regular contact with the livestock producers and others to let them know, they've all got access to the data, and they can look and see where wolves are moving and establishing. And so they have very regular conversations, very frank conversations with producers that say, hey, there's wolves in the area, and something you might think about. And then we have lots of programs that we can work with those producers to put tools out to try to keep conflict from happening. We'll never prevent all conflict, but if we can minimize that or mitigate that, that's certainly helpful. And so, yeah, I mean, even whether it's denning season or not, we have those kinds of conversations. But like Brenna was saying, I mean, even the females. If a pregnant female will be very active all the way through gestation, it's not until the very final days that we start to see that
That makes sense. Yeah.
stoppage in movements. Yeah.
Yeah. Good for her and them. Um, okay, another thing you brought up tangentially, but I know everybody wants to know, or at least I do, and my 13-year-old daughter, what's going on with the Copper Creek pack?
Yeah.
The
So
puppies, the mom, like what's the story?
yeah, I think people are pretty well aware of the Copper Creek animals. This is the pack that was in Grand County and had some substantial depredation issues in Grand County. And so we made the decision. The decision was made by our director to capture those animals and bring them into a facility. And that same week that we did all of the reintroductions of the 15 wolves from British Columbia, we also re-released the remaining members of what was the Copper Creek pack. And that was there was a breeding male, a breeding female, and then 5 pups were the product of that last spring. We were able to capture 4 of the pups in that capture work, and actually Brenna was really critical in that work. And then captured both the male and the female, the breeders, and the male died. It was had a gunshot wound and a pretty substantial, very substantial injury that wasn't due from the trapping, but from that gunshot wound. He ultimately died. And then 1 pup that we were never able to capture. And so the female and the 4 pups were re-released in January, and they're around. They're doing well. They're doing what wolves do, and so we're keeping tabs on them. We'll see, because there's the female is the breeding pair is no longer intact. We'll see what happens with her and some of these other animals that are released around her.
So are
Yeah,
they
and
still
to
together? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick because Eric mentioned that there were 5 pups and then 4 of them were caught. That 5th pup, I'm sure people are curious what happened to that one. Still out there, it seems to be doing well. We monitor that wolf with trail cameras. It doesn't have a collar or anything, so we keep tabs on it through those trail cameras and public sighting reports, which are always really helpful to us. Yeah, it seems like that 5th one is doing well out there.
And then one last question on that. Are they still a pack? Or is the Copper Creek pack no longer a unified unit?
It's a good question. Brendan and I were chatting about that just the other day as to whether we should keep calling them the Copper Creek pack or because they're not it's not a breeding pair and all of that. Typically what our definition is that. But Brendan, I'll let you talk about how we use those data and how we keep track of that stuff in our databases and so on.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a good question, right? Like what is a wolf pack really is the question. And a wolf pack
Yes.
is a family group. A wolf pack is breeding male and female, and then their pups, and then maybe their pups from a previous year, or the sibling of the breeding male or female. It's a family group, really. So it's funny what a wolf pack is. Eric and I were talking about it from kind of a data perspective and how we keep track of that. So in Colorado, I mentioned before that we have wolves that are traveling together, and why would they not be called a pack? And we consider wolves to be a pack when there's a male and female who breed and then they reproduce that year. So even though we have a couple, groups of wolves traveling together or pairs of wolves traveling together, we don't consider them a pack yet in Colorado because they haven't reproduced. They might reproduce this spring or something, and then that's when they become an official pack. They'll get a pack name, and we'll treat them as such later in this year. So yeah, for Copper Creek, it's kind of funny because it is the breeding female with the 4 pups. So do we consider them a pack still just because there's not a male there? Eric and I had a bit of a debate on what we do in that situation.
Oh man, I feel like you're opening up a can of worms with that.
Yeah. Yeah,
we could
we
spend the
are.
rest of the time talking about that with the listeners. Um, well, that's really interesting. Is it okay if what should I tell my kid? Like, it's okay, Hollis. You can keep calling them because the debate's still ongoing. Or could they be the Copper Creek Pack in memory of the male that died, formerly known as? Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
there you go. I mean, and we'll see because they're not in the same area that they were before, so we might have to debate it a little bit more.
Yeah. Oh, one more, and then I'll move on to another subject. So there's no reason why the female would not mate with another wolf and reproduce, right? They're not like
No, no, she would when that breeding male was gone last year, this year she could she could accept another male into that pack. Yeah.
okay. All right. I'm gonna jump into a reader question now. Let's see. This is I don't know who these are coming from, so I okay. A lot has been made um, by proponents of wolf reintroduction about wolves balancing the ecosystem. This reader wants to know, is Colorado's or was Colorado's ecosystem out of balance before wolves came, and how are they balancing it now?
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot, and I'll say a little bit, and Brent, if you've got some others to add to it too. So, I mean, the idea there's lots of different ways to look at it. I mean, wolves are a native species to the state, and so part of what Colorado Parks and Wildlife does is restore and manage or wildlife populations just generally, and we've taken a lot of work to reestablish populations of lynx, populations of black-footed ferret, two species I've been involved with, but lots of other species too, and um, for the enjoyment of the citizens and the visitors of the state. And so there's a lot of reasons to think about why to reintroduce wolves. Whether the ecosystem was out of balance with or without wolves is somewhat of a subjective arrangement. And the idea that bringing wolves in, there's a lot's been made out of the idea of a trophic cascade, that you bring wolves in and that changes the behavior of prey, and that the changing behavior of elk grazing and browsing and grazing the deer has an effect on rivers and shrubs, and that trickles down to butterflies and birds and all of that. I think that some of that work that's been done has been done in a very different system in national park systems, and there may be some impacts and some very identifiable trends that are can be attributed to the presence of wolves. Colorado is a very different system, and we are taking a look at some of that. We've got some researchers that are looking at some of those different kinds of changes. Certainly right now with the number of wolves that we have, 20, 28, I think it is 29, there that's far too low of a population, and having been here for a year or a little bit over a year, not enough time. And so if there's going to be an impact from having wolves on the landscape, it's going to take more animals for much longer period of time. And that's a big if too. I mean, it's a really really challenging thing to measure and to say with any degree of certainty that yes, that certainly is because of wolves, rather than wolves were here and things changed and maybe that was because of that, or maybe it was because of something else, warmer temperatures or more rain or something, something else different can affect all of those things as well. So it's a challenging question to ask. I think that the story that wolves change rivers is it's an appealing story because it makes a lot of intuitive sense, but it's far more complicated than it's made out to be.
Yeah, like recently it's not been debunked, but it's been challenged.
Yeah, yeah, it has for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it's the question of like the balance of nature is a scientific question, but it's also a question of philosophy, like what is balance, what is not. And, with so many humans on the landscape, just in the Western US, what do we consider balanced at this point? So it's a tough question that I don't know has an amazing answer because, places where that research, like Eric said, places where that research has been done, those effects are, if they're detected, and they're very difficult to detect, they're very patchy. So
Mhm.
it's a tough question, but we could talk for hours about just that.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So you said you have researchers kind of starting to look at this. Will they be factoring in the human factor since we are a pretty populated state, and you know, like we're so different than the other places, the Frank Church Wilderness or the Yellowstone.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, Colorado is different from the Northern Rockies, and so yeah, I think that there's a different, yeah, they look at a lot of different ways to kind of tease apart all the different variables that have an effect on what the ecosystems look like.
That'll be really fascinating to watch roll out. CU should maybe, or one of the universities should maybe like offer a master's program in that. The students could do the research. Okay, let's see here, Eric. Let's talk about calving season. It's just starting. You said earlier, I think, and we, to me, I'm sitting here in Netherlands. I'm like, oh, it's pretty quiet out there. It's not very much going on, and I pay attention. But now that like animals are dropping calves and lambs and stuff, what do you expect might happen? Or I mean, what will happen?
I wish I had the crystal ball to tell you what will happen. I don't know what will happen. I think that we're in a different position than we were a year ago. Far different position. We've got a lot more staff hired on. CPW does to do some of our wildlife damage. We've got 10 wildlife damage specialists that are hired on, and these are staff that are strategically placed all around the western slope where high density wolf distribution is right now, and their job is to get out and do investigations as quickly as they can, work with producers proactively, try to talk with them about doing site assessments and looking at how their operation works, and coming in to it with the wildlife perspective and saying, okay, well, how would using different kinds of tools, whether it's range riders or fox lights or fladry or different kinds of tools, or different ways of managing the livestock to try to again minimize or mitigate some of that potential for damage. And so yeah, there will always be conflict wherever wolves and livestock share the landscape. There will be conflict, and our job now is to try to get ahead of that and try to be proactive and try to work with producers that willing producers. We're not going in and forcing anything on anybody, but to go into to say, hey, here's some opportunities, here's some funding and tools that CPW can provide. Colorado Department of Ag is also a good partner with this. Some of the federal agencies, Natural Resource Conservation Service is also a big player in this, as are many NGOs. And so trying to work with them with the producers to say, let's see where there's some vulnerability, where there's some risks, and try to get ahead of that. And so that's something that we didn't have a year ago. We've also got a really well-established range rider program where we can work with contractors that are essentially hired on with CPW to do some of that work, where they're spending a lot of time with the livestock and checking out behavior, trying to assess if animals are stressed or feeling the effects of maybe having wolves on the landscape, and then using those clues to change management a little bit, and to address those kinds of things. And so yeah, we're just heading into it. It's the beginning of calving and lambing season both, and we had a fair bit of conflict that started really kind of April was when things really started to heat up for us last year,
Mm.
and we certainly know that there's calving and lambing already. One of the things I'll say is that we've had some really great cooperation with, and there were some um, issues where wolves were around, and we would see some kind of localization for things, and our local field staff would go out and talk with those producers, and they very willingly they would say, oh, that's thank you for letting us know about this, and letting us know what we might be able to do. Very simple changes, very it's that cooperation that's going to be really really key in establishing and living with wolves. And so when we have those kinds of experiences working with producers that are curious, and we recognize that they may not have voted for wolves, and we're dealing with it now most prevalently on the west slope, but that distribution will change a bit too over time. That we have to figure out how to get ahead of this, and so we've learned a lot in the last year, and improving. I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm sure that we'll have some big issues, and we'll never get totally ahead of it, but hopefully we're in a position now where we can try to avoid those kinds of big issues that we've had in the last year.
I'm glad you mentioned the distribution deal, because A few people wrote in and asked about this, but I live where the mountain lion was attacking all the dogs for a while, and that was really scary for people, like exceptionally terrifying and traumatic for some people. And you know, we're here just right over the Continental Divide from Grand County. You can see Devil's Thumb, and a lot. This is the Front Range, right? And people are wondering, like, that's not going to take them much to get over here, right? And so people have asked, you know, what's some like human wolf interaction advice that you have to them if and when the wolves start kind of coming into rural neighborhoods or stuff like that, and
Yeah,
also how dangerous are wolves to humans, children.
you
I
want to
can
take that,
go.
Brenna?
Yeah. Yeah, so no, it's a really good question. And in general, wolves don't want anything to do with people. So that's what we've found throughout the Western US and in mostly North America. So the good news is also that anything that you would do to minimize conflict with, say, a mountain lion or a bear is kind of the same thing that you would do for a wolf. You know, you want to be recreating on the landscape, and this is, you know, kind of for like the non-hunting recreating, because when you are out there, you kind of want to have, you know, wild animals know that you're there so they can leave the area. And you might never know that, you know, a wolf, a black bear, a moose or something is in the area because you don't see it. It hears you first, it smells you first, and, you know, it gets off trail, leaves wherever you are. As far as wolf people interactions, the vast majority of people recreating in Western Colorado are never going to know that a wolf is even around, and that's because they're just plain not interested in being around us.
Okay. On the same note, what would you say? There are going to be people who are going to want to make a wolf their pet, like a puppy. What what do you say to those people? Why is that a bad idea?
I very much don't recommend that. I know they look a lot like our dogs. There are some dogs in Western Colorado we've gotten photos of that may have escaped their yard or something. I go, oh my gosh, I have to do kind of a double take because someone sends in the photo and thinks that it's a wolf, and very understandably so for some of those animals. Anyone who's, you know, interested in having a wild wolf as a pet, I recommend having our domestic dog that has, you know, evolved for thousands of years to live with us, live in our houses. They make much better pets than any wild animal ever could.
Good call. All right. Let's see here. I know there's been a lot of discussion among people about the British Columbia wolves being so much bigger and a completely different animal almost, and you know their characteristics are different. Their maybe prey habits are different. Like what are the differences? Everything from weight to how they act between these two groups of wolves.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We get it a lot too, and the 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 simple answer to it is that there's not that much difference. I mean, fundamentally, the wolves that are in the lower 48 right now are, for the most part, a product of the reintroductions from Yellowstone and central Idaho in the mid 90s. And those animals came from not too far away from where we were in British Columbia. So from a source population side of things, they're essentially the same population. You know, they're coming from the same broad geographic source as where they are, as where the northern Rockies wolves came from, as the Oregon wolves came from. And so there's biologically there is no difference between the wolves from Oregon or the wolves from British Columbia. That, you know, it's a different subspecies than what was here historically. What was here historically is no longer around. But and that's the claim that we get a lot too, is that we're reintroducing the wrong wolves. What we're reintroducing is the gray wolf, Canis lupus, and you know, there's a lot to be said about all of the different taxonomic evaluations of wolves and so on. But that, historically maybe the wolves were a little bit smaller, a little bit different, but it's all within the range of variability. The idea of subspecies works really, really well for the type of animals that or plants as well that just don't move very much. I mean, that's what causes that differentiation and keeps it going. And so when animals become isolated, then they change a bit and become different subspecies. Well, wolves are different. Like wolves, we've had wolves that there was wolves from the northern Rockies that walked all the way down to the Grand Canyon and back. And so that idea of isolation is really, really challenging. And so it's just a different way of looking at things of wolves compared to things like, oh, I don't know, a different different types of fish that are really constrained to particular types of drainages, or small mammals that really don't have that ability to move that great distance. So yeah, wolves are what we have here is different from what we had historically, whether it's substantially different in terms of weights or preys or prey preferences and so on, is very, very minimal. I mean, their prey is native ungulates, elk, deer, in the northern Rockies, some bison as well. And their weight wise, I think I don't have the numbers right in front of me. I think our males average, Brenna I'm sure has it close by, 100 110 pounds, maybe a little bit more. The females are a bit lighter, 80 90 pounds, something like that. But that's all within the range of variability. And weight is another thing that we get asked about a lot, and that's a really it can be a really confounding factor. I mean, the wolves don't eat every day, and so if and we
Oh,
did catch a
interesting.
few wolves right on elk kills, and so they had when we were in British Columbia, and so they had 10 15 pounds of meat in their belly, and you weigh those, and of course they're going to be heavier than they would be a week or so later when they hadn't eaten for that time too. So size wise, weight wise, these are all very, very similar to what we have.
Super interesting. Well, speaking of what they eat, a lot of people have been wondering what they're eating. And I know there's a whole contingent of people out there who are really worried about the wolves decimating our elk population. And so, can you kind of address both of those things?
Yeah. Yeah. So, we don't have a super, big crew going out and looking at every single cluster of GPS points, but we do go to some of them. And what we've seen at some of them, these wolves are eating deer, are eating elk. Wolves hunt more successfully in a pack, but they can hunt on their own, definitely. So, even though it might be just one wolf, it doesn't mean that that wolf has to live off, rabbits, squirrels, things like that. Like one wolf can hunt and kill a deer by itself. So it's not necessarily, they can only eat those ungulates while they're in a pack. And as far as the worry that, there'll be some sort of huge effect of wolves on native ungulates in Colorado. um, I think a good thing to remember is that wolves and elk and deer have evolved together for thousands and thousands of years, and they have persisted through thousands and thousands of years. And that means that, wolves aren't killing all the elk, aren't killing all the deer because there'd be nothing left for them to eat. So, certainly we know that wolves kill and eat deer and elk. So of course, those particular elk and deer are not going to live when they're being eaten by wolves. But they have evolved together for so long that it would be not in the best interest of a species longevity just in the world for them to eat too many really of the prey that they're looking for.
And
Tracy,
so, do you?
oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Well, just to add a little bit to that, I mean, in a very unique kind of situation when we were coming back to the Copper Creek, we were not able to capture that fifth pup, and it was, really kind of uncertain as to what's going to happen of that animal. I mean, that's a very young, naive animal. All of a sudden is literally on his own, and he probably survived eating rabbits and squirrels and some of those kinds of things. Probably also, this was in the fall, probably thrived on some of the gut piles from hunters as well. And so
Hmm.
they're very resourceful kinds of animals, and so what they like they'll find what they need, and they're good at doing that. That's the job of the wolf.
That's a that's a really good point because I think something that's often missed in the conversation of what wolves eat is that will scavenge whatever they can. If they find an elk that didn't make it through the winter because it was in poor condition and it died of, just being malnourished, they will take that free meal every single time. It's pretty dangerous for wolves to hunt. Maybe 10-15% of wolves will die in some places, from being kicked by an elk or a moose or a bison or something like that. So it's pretty dangerous to try and for a wolf to try and feed itself just by its teeth. So if they can find a free meal of something that is already dead, a dead elk, dead deer, something like that, they'll take that opportunity.
So is that lone pup, like, just from observation, a healthy look, like it's a healthy weight and like it's thriving?
It looks great. Yeah, it looks like it has a great winter coat. It looks to be about the right size. We don't necessarily know if it's a male or female, but at this point, it looks really good from the photos that we've seen.
That's cool. One other question I have about elk and wolves. So I know that there's ecological balance and stuff, and when you have too much of this and all that stuff, um, you know what I'm trying to say. Like, there's balance, and that's why we manage wildlife, or you guys manage wildlife populations, and I'm wondering, I don't think that it's common knowledge how much wolves eat. And you brought it up, Eric. I thought that was interesting to know that you'd find 10 pounds of meat in a wolf's stomach. Like, how much are they eating? How many elk, would a wolf on average eat over a year, or pounds of elk?
Do you want me to go? I'll
Yeah,
go.
go for it, Brenna.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I know we're going to get in the weeds for just a second here, I promise, because when we talk about how many elk a wolf eats per year, it's really hard to put a number on that because in the winter they're eating larger animals. Say they're eating adults that are in poor condition, even yearlings, calves of that year that are really, they're pretty big at that point. But then you go into early summer when elk are calving and they're eating more calves. So if we go by just how many elk are wolves eating, it doesn't tell us a whole lot about how much food they're getting because in the winter they're eating these really large animals and in the summer they're eating these really small animals. So it's kind of tough, to kind of
Yeah.
get to your question actually though. Wolves, a wolf will eat, several elk per year. So it depends, kind of like, are they eating other prey? Are they eating deer? Are they eating, smaller game? Are they eating moose? Are they eating bison in some areas? So, maybe to put a number on it, maybe an elk a month or something like that. But it's a tougher question to answer than it might seem like on the surface because of that discrepancy in what type of elk they're eating throughout the year.
Yeah, I appreciate that nuance. I think that's really interesting. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time here. Um, I
I think I lost her.
Oh yeah. All right, Eric, we're going to talk to each other now.
I do see some questions in the chat about telling the story, telling the story about wolves and the data, and we do have these GPS data that give us a story about where wolves have been, and some of the patterns that they're using. We don't plan to share GPS data, right? We don't do that for any other of our species, and And there's a couple of reasons for it. I mean, these are still a federally endangered species, so we manage them as a partner, as a designated agent with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so there's some limitations on that. And moreover, I mean, we have the duty to protect the wolves and to try to get them to restore this population. You're back, Tracy. We're just answering a couple of these questions that were in the chat too.
Yes.
So, um, and also there's vulnerability, right? I mean, there's clearly a couple of the wolves have been shot, and so sharing GPS data is not something that we want to do because of the potential that they're using similar travel patterns, travel corridors. If some of that information got into the wrong hands, it would not be beneficial for what one of our ultimate goals is, which is establishing wolf populations. And so we will tell stories. We will get to points where we have more information, more generalized information, but more specific than the watershed maps that we're putting out now. But at this point in time, we're not going to be sharing GPS data, and I don't anticipate that that's on the near horizon either. But there is, but like some of the commenters have said, there are great stories to tell, and so we're working on ways to communicate all of that.
Did you hear my whole question before I got
Not
booted?
at all. Not at all.
Oh, okay. Okay. I'll make it simpler. What will success look like with restoring wolves in Colorado? And then also, is there another layer of success when you look at it from like a continental North America standpoint?
Yeah, great question. So for Colorado, and that's really where our focus is. We're looking at wolves and establishing a self-sustaining wolf population. So what does self-sustaining mean? I mean, it gets us to a point where we don't have to have constant inputs to try to keep that population going. Where we are right now, our plan says that we'll do 3 to 5 years of 10 to 15 wolves per year of reintroductions. And so we've just finished year 2. The year 3 would bring 10 to 15 more. So in year 1, 10, in year 2, 15, maybe say we get another 15, we've got 40 wolves reintroduced, and then beyond there. So that's clearly not a self-sustaining population, but gets us down the road to meeting some of the goals that the plan talks about. And so we not only are wolves federally endangered, federally protected, they're also state protected as well. And so to downlist from our state endangered status to a state threatened status requires 50 wolves for 4 years. So we get to a number that's a reasonably high number to say, okay, they're on their way. And not only do we meet that number for 1 year, but we sustain that over a period of time, over 4 years. And if we get to that, then we'll downlist to a state threatened status. The commission, Parks and Wildlife Commission, will take that action. Then to delist the species from the state list is 150 animals for 2 years or 200 animals with no time constraint. If we get to a population of 200, then we really do think that we've gotten to a self-sustaining population, and then they would be state delisted. Whether or not they're federally delisted depends on a whole lot of other things that are entirely out of the control of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and so that we'll still monitor and manage it as is appropriate from the federal status. But it's important to know that there still are state protections, and delisting does not mean that they automatically become a game species or anything like that. There's many species in the state that are neither state listed nor a game species, and that could be the status of wolves. Our plan does not have any kind of objective as to how many wolves we want to have beyond those recovery goals. And again, those recovery goals are only for state levels. It has nothing to do with the Endangered Species Act, the Federal Endangered Species Act. And so, partly that was intentional. That was not partly. That was entirely intentional to say, we don't know what it's like to live with 50 wolves or 200 wolves or 500 wolves or whatever. And so our plan is a very adaptive plan, and we will revisit it periodically throughout the life of the plan. And right now, what we're focused on is just getting a population restored, and then as time goes on and we get more experience and we learn, what all the different costs and the different opportunities are with having wolves in the state, then we can make more informed decisions on what really is where we want to go and how many wolves we think we should have and how to manage that population.
Super interesting. Wow. Well, that's it. Unbelievably, we are out of time. And I want to thank you both for coming on and just, answering all these questions. I know that people are out there and they're really curious and they're invested and they want to know, and you're doing a good job giving us information. And
You froze up again, unfortunately.
Uh-oh.
Odell and Brenna Cassidy from Colorado Wildlife. And oh, did I bump out again? And yeah, I just thank you and really appreciate your time.
Thanks,
Thanks
Tracy.
for having us.
Yeah, thanks a bunch for having us. Thanks for the interest, and stick with us. We're going to learn a lot and continue to improve. Thanks a bunch.
And I wanted to thank everybody who tuned in as well. I appreciate you guys too. Ooh. All right, I think that's us.
Okay.
Oh,
Recording
you guys are both uploaded. So you're good.
Successfully uploaded.
Yeah, I got that too.
Yep. All right. Thank you. That was really, really fun. I appreciate it.